Hi, everybody. Good evening and welcome to the Finding You podcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy, and today is Thursday, June 4th, 2026. Tonight's topic is why boundaries are so difficult. It's a topic I could do about every month or so. It's so central to what people struggle with because our boundaries are something that cause us so much angst, so much confusion, so much difficulty in our lives, where we set them, where we don't, what happens when we don't set them, what happens when we do. There seems to be no easy way through this topic. So I want to revisit it again and talk about what we're up against, what's in play when we think about the work of boundaries. What are we really managing? Before I get into the topic, I'll talk about our upcoming events and our housekeeping items. If you're interested in working with us in doing our flagship program, which in my opinion is the best intervention I've ever been a part of to help accelerate or springboard you into your work, that is our Finding You program at Finding You. So Finding You is our flagship program. If you're interested in an individual intensive, a couples intensive, if you're interested in a family intensive, you can inquire by going to our website. But if you're looking for that kind of entry level experience, it's Finding You. I'll be running the next Finding You June 10th. I think we still have that one spot left open. So if you're interested, you can reach out to us June 10th through 14th. We also have introduced a online intensive, which we used to do regularly, but because we're not running an in-person intensive in July, because I'll be at the Omega Institute, we have an online offering July 26th through 28th. So if you're interested, you can reach out to us for that. August 5th is the intensive after that. September 9th, it's all inclusive. It's just under $5,000, and it's something that, in my opinion, is worth 6 months or a year's worth of therapy in a short period of time. We also have support groups for the alumni of our program. So on the third Wednesday of each month, we host a meeting. The next one will be on June 20th. If you're looking for a coach or a therapist who works in the Finding You model, you can reach out to us via our website or that email address, info@findingyouprograms.com, to learn how you can be connected to a therapist who works in this model. Like I mentioned earlier, I'll be at the Omega Institute this summer, July 12th through 17th. So if you're looking for a deep dive in an incredible setting and a really affordable price, that workshop is that opportunity. Go to eomega.org. That's eomega.org. My daughter Emma and I will be facilitating the Audacity to Be You workshop. Learn to love your horrible, rotten self. So if you want something that's a less intense than an intensive, more affordable for sure, and more interactive, more provocative, more evocative than just listening to the podcast, these workshops, I keep saying intensive, these workshops are that offering. I will be at the Art of Living Retreat Center in the fall, same workshop, same co-facilitator, my daughter Emma, September 27th through October 2nd. That's in a different part of the country in Boone, North Carolina. So if you're interested in that, go to their website at artoflivingretreatcenter.org, artoflivingretreatcenter.org. If you have any confusion, you can reach out to us and we can make sure that you get signed up for these. And with that, I'll get right into tonight's topic. So to begin, I want to start with this idea. This is from the Audacity to Be You. Most people don't think feelings are enough. They think they have to be right to prove themselves in a virtual court with the other, sitting as judge and jury. But the reality is that our feelings and our best guesses are really all that we have. Anything else is a paper tiger, something we try to use to influence the opinions of others that we are right. But in fact, boundaries are not about being right. They're about being a self. In this way of thinking, you don't get to be right anymore, but you do get to be a self. And being a self is so much better. So it doesn't matter if you're on the sending end of the boundary or the receiving end of the boundary. The idea is that the person setting that boundary isn't obligated to prove to anybody of the value of their boundary, the rightness of their boundary, the validity, they don't have to present evidence. And yet most of us don't grow up in families where a boundary is enough. And it's complex, complicated, and nuanced, but most of us were punished for our boundaries or threatened for our boundaries as children. Now, as children, we were very messy about the way we set our boundaries and oftentimes dysregulated in our execution of our boundaries. But the fact of the matter is that we learned that our feelings aren't enough from the soup that we were cooked in. So most of us think we have to prove to other people that we are right. That old adage, and this will be sort of the keystone idea, simply put, in this broadcast, comes from the 12-step world, which is no is a complete sentence. So if you engage in defending and justifying yourself, you're kind of playing into this mentality that to set a boundary, you have to have some kind of official objective stamp of approval, or at least the acceptance, the agreement of the person with whom you're setting the boundary. I was asked recently, what percentage of people do you estimate on the planet kind of operate in this way that I'm describing, where you just get to say no if you want to say no? And I estimated that probably 99% of the world, by my experience, my estimation, don't really understand what boundaries are, how to set them, and kind of what it takes. If you're on the receiving end of the boundary, it is even more important for you to understand the other person doesn't have to be right. They don't have to prove to you that some information that they have rises to a certain threshold where you accept their boundary as valid. They get to say no. I was just describing the people in my circle today, if they set a boundary with me, my assumption is they must need to. They must have a good reason. If I start to take it personally and think they don't love me, or this is not a reciprocal relationship, that means something's going on in my psyche that needs my attention. That means that I'm assigning some meaning to this based on my background that doesn't necessarily apply. Now, if you cancel plans often with me, I'm going to take from that you're not a reliable source to make plans with, for example. If I ask you to help out with something and you let me know last minute that you can't, my assumption can be maybe the next time I'm not sure that you're going to be the person that I'm going to lean on if you were in a critical space in this support that I needed. But it's not personal. It's not a punishment. It's not a way to kind of leverage my anger back at you and make you feel bad about it. It's just the way that it is. So boundaries aren't about being right, being good, being justified. Boundaries are about being a person. I wrote in The Audacity to Be You, learning to balance compassion for others' pain, for our children in this case I was talking about, for others' pain while maintaining accountability is a critical feature in parenting and attachment. We can hold people accountable without making it personal. And what I mean by that is we can simply adjust. If I ask you to do something and I need help and you don't come through, my conclusion might be, like I said, you might not be the person to ask next time, especially if this is a pattern. Because apparently the life that you're living doesn't set you up well to be able to commit to something and to follow through for whatever good reason you have. You know, in psychology, I was talking to a couple of friends recently, and there was this idea. Somebody said to me, for those of you who don't know, I'm a former Mormon. I don't call myself an ex-Mormon because that X has kind of an edge to it that I don't identify with. I'm a former Mormon. I was a Mormon in my earlier life, and it was great for me until it wasn't. And somebody said to me, asked me the question, they said, if an active Mormon, an LDS person, approached you and accused you and said to you, you know, the reason that you left the church is because you wanted to have a party and have sex with whoever you wanted to and not be accountable, what would you say to that person? And my response was, well, I wouldn't say anything. I would listen, but I definitely wouldn't say anything back to them to defend myself, because when I decided to leave that consciousness, that paradigm, it wasn't about, for me, leaving a specific religion, a specific ideology. It was leaving behind the idea that I have to justify my life to anybody. Now, I wish that idea that I just told you that I embodied in that situation were consistent across the board in my life, and it's not, and so I'm still working on that. My adult daughter once said to a group of folks, where I was present. She said, I go to therapy in part because leaving my family of origins pathology causes me a lot of guilt. So I go to therapy, she said, because my therapist can help me carry that guilt. I can hand some of it to them and they can carry it for me or with me. Even though she was talking about me, I thought, fantastic. Because folks, there's maybe nothing more universal that is more underreported, if that makes sense. Like, it doesn't get talked about, than this idea I'm about to share with you, which is getting healthier by virtually, but at least the standard that I appeal to, which is the psychology, this psychology. Getting healthier will cause you to feel guilt, will trigger your insecurity, will reveal the unevolved, the unaddressed issues that you carry around in your body and in your psyche. So if you find yourself feeling like you need to explain and justify, some of the language that I give people when I'm encouraging boundaries is languages like, I'm not comfortable with that. I need to take some space. I have to take some time to myself. I encourage honesty that is vague. So I'm not encouraging you to lie, but I'm encouraging honesty that is vague. I'm giving language for that. And so when you participate in that way of being, and if the people can respond to you, and if this is not that consistent pattern that demonstrates you're not a reliable person to be in relationship with, and by the way, you have to be willing to tolerate that too. If somebody says to you, based on this boundary you've set with me, you're not a reliable person for me, your response is, okay. Okay, I respect that also. But going back to it, when you set this kind of boundary, or on the receiving end of this kind of boundary, if you can adapt, if you can not take it personal, if you can see and tune into and to the other person, even if you don't know the specifics, but with some energetic resonance that you realize that they must have a good reason. My experience is that the people around you end up being people that are better at boundaries. But I'm going to say something clearly at the outset of tonight's broadcast, which is this. It's not about, in this case, it's not about how often you set the boundary. It's not about the behavior that you do. This work is about transformation. So it's not about not taking it personally. I would never tell you don't take it personally. That would be insane to say to somebody. But what I will tell you is, as you do this work and your work deepens, you won't take it personally. So it's not about not justifying yourself. Like you might hear me implying, possibly, and I don't mean to be implying that. It's not about not taking it personally. It's not about not justifying. It is that as the work deepens in you, you won't take it personally and you won't justify. You won't explain yourself because you don't need the other person to be okay with you. And whatever they're going to accuse you of, after a healthy boundary, you've made peace with yourself in that area enough that it just doesn't matter. Or at least you're able to withstand the onslaught of accusations and criticisms and feelings that are coming your way because you have fortified yourself through the work. And that's really what tonight is about. It's not about changing your behavior. It's about realizing that boundaries come out of the work. When I was giving the speech, which I've said many times before, and a therapist challenged me about, I was teaching about these ideas, and a therapist said, I can't believe you're suggesting to us that we tell our clients to kick their adult children out of the house when they're using drugs. The consequences could be death. How could we do that to a mother or a father? And I said, I would never tell somebody what to do. I would help them work through their codependency, their lack of a sense of self, which is codependency, so that whatever they said would be okay. So I don't have opinions about your boundaries. I don't have opinions about what you should do with your marriage, with your child, with your friend, with your boss, with your brother, your sister, your parents. That's not the point. I don't even care about thinking about the behaviors in those ways. But what I understand is that our ability to set and execute and follow through on healthy boundaries is a sign, a symptom of our inner work, of our evolutions. So I'm going to talk about several ways in which boundaries are difficult, where they catch us. The first one is that we need to shift the fundamental idea that boundaries are about changing other people. Most people think of boundaries in terms of what's the appropriate boundary to set with my child that will work. You see the phrase that will work. What do you think will work with my spouse, with my parents? And I have to take it a step back and I say, what do you mean by work? That they won't be mad? That they won't think you're a flake or irresponsible or unreliable or disgusting or whatever the word is that you choose that you don't want to be? Because if that's the question you're asking me, how will the boundary work? Which one will work? I don't have any answers for you. There's no guarantee that you'll get everything you want when it comes to the things that are outside of your control. And if you're asking me, what's the best boundary to set to be able to manipulate people, to control how they feel and think about you, how they perceive you, that's a more honest version of the question. The simplest way that I can describe this shift, is from making decisions based on outcomes, how other people will think, respond, feel, perceive you. The shift is from making decisions based on outcomes versus making a decision based on what you need, what resonates with your inner knowing. And if your life, like most people's lives, hasn't been set up for you to look to an inner knowing, to an inner kind of tuning fork, if that hasn't been the project, and it is not for most people the project in their families growing up, then you're not going to have access to that kind of tuning fork to measure any decision against. But the simplest thing that I can describe in the shift from what I'm talking about here, from taking care of others to taking care of yourself, is that you stop making decisions based on how other people respond, react, feel, think, behave, and you start making decisions based on what you need, what resonates with your inner knowing, and what is the simple expression of your truth. Now that sounds very psychobabblish. If it does to you, then there's more work to do. If it makes sense to you, then you're onto it. Eventually, this will make sense. And what you'll notice is it's different from the way that most people talk about boundaries in the world, in the common culture. If you get into an Al-Anon practice or a good attachment-based, analytically influenced therapist who's not interested in fixing you, but rather interested in finding you so you can sort it out yourself, discover your own truth. If you're in those circles, it's going to make it's obvious. What I'm saying is obvious to those people. But to the vast majority of humans in every culture that I've ever visited or met with, this is not common knowledge. Boundaries are not about changing or for changing other people. But they come from this sense of self. As in, this is what I feel good about. This is what I need in this situation. And that's a pretty unassailable position to take. This is what I need. And if the other person does mount an offensive attack against that, then you know somebody. You know immediately about that person that they're not in a place to be, at least in that moment, in an intimate relationship, in a healthy relationship. So some of the verbiage I give you tonight, it's not about the language. It's not about the words that I'm using, but it illustrates an energy. This is my boundary. This is what I feel okay with. Well, why do you want to set that boundary? Where's it coming from? What do you mean? I'm not in the mood right now to explain myself, perhaps. Or you could say, if I explain myself, I'm afraid that you're going to counter it with a rebuttal, with a counterpoint. to which they will say, well, no, I won't. And then they will. What I've learned is that people that need an explanation will never understand. And people that understand this work, they won't need an explanation because they already get it. So you start to notice a kind of psychology, a kind of vibration, a kind of consciousness out in the world where people don't give advice, because advice is in this work is not really that important. People will talk about their experience, what works for them. They'll share examples, stories from their own life of how they've negotiated similar experiences, but they won't give advice. And fundamentally, they don't give advice because they realize that the task in life is not about behavior. It's not about, I don't want to be too much of a cliche, but it's not about human doing, it's about human being. You see, in this psychology that I talk about and teach on this podcast, it's not about what you do, it's who you are that is the thing. And as who you are becomes more integrated, more whole, more clear, you become more tethered to your real authentic self, more connected to it. You find your voice. You know your truth. You know what you want, what you don't want, what you like, what you don't like, what you can tolerate, what you won't tolerate. As those things deepen in you, you'll realize that you don't want to be around people who give advice and have lots of opinions about lots of things. This work leads to not having as many opinions, assumptions, not as many judgments. Judgments, opinions are what we do when we're not capable of this kind of critical thinking. Judgments are an attempt to protect ourselves. We think if we can cling to our judgments that somehow we will live a life that is beyond reproach, beyond criticism. But in my experience, it absolutely leaves you much more open to all the criticism. So we learn to listen. Listen to the other person as much as you're able, or as much as you want to. Respond with genuine empathy and allow them to be angry, hurt, or upset with you and your decisions. And this can sound like another example of how it might sound, what the energy looks like in print. It looks like, I get it. You're angry. You're upset with me, and it makes sense. I'm sorry this is so hard. I'm glad you're telling me how you feel. End quote. Or just simply stay silent and be present with them. Staying connected while setting a boundary is difficult for most of us. We can do it out of rage or anger, but we often have to get to that point of overwhelm, of dysregulation, before our protective self shows up. We're too laden with fear and guilt, fear of abandonment, fear of not being loved, fear of not being approved of being abandoned, of being cut off, of being alienated, of being alone. That's why until we can make peace with being alone, until we can be okay with being alone, we are incapable of being in an intimate relationship, because otherwise we'll constantly be sacrificing ourselves and blowing up this pattern. In domestic violence treatment, they call it the cycle of violence. But in less acute forms, it looks like stuffing, exploding, denying myself, abandoning myself, lashing out, not taking care of myself, and then overcorrecting by taking too much, more than my share, so to speak, and whatever the equation is. We don't use our emotions, our expression, our shared emotions to try to get other people to change. That's a very, very, very common approach in boundaries and relationships. If I tell you how angry, how sad, how frustrated, how hurt, how offended I am, and I hand that to you with enough force, then you will feel responsible for it. And of course, the way out of me feeling that way that you are now responsible for is for you to capitulate and change your behavior or your boundary. So we learn in this work not to use our emotions, our expression of emotions, to try to change other people. When you stop doing that, when you do this, when you do use your emotions, you're doing this to tell the other person that your feelings are your responsibility. And this will reinforce in them, because this is the message that we received as children, that they are to believe that what others think and feel about them is theirs to manage. So we don't say, here's the example, I'm angry, scared, or hurt, unquote, as a substitute for setting a boundary. See, what we do in lieu of or instead of boundaries is we try to change other people. If I can convince you, if I can guilt you, if I can shame you, if I can draw out of you an empathic response where you're going to pay more attention to what I need than to what you need. I do everything. I blame, I argue, I debate, I justify, I cry, I threaten, I whine, I nag. All of those things that I do are an attempt to change you. Because if I change you, then I don't have to do the work. Then I don't have to deal with who I am. And the inevitable loneliness and terror that comes when I have the experience that that might not be good enough. So we learn to set boundaries by saying, this is what I'm okay with, this is what I'm not. We learn and become acutely sensitive to the exchange of emotional content between two people. And we ask ourselves, am I telling you this to try to get you to change? To try to get you to see it my way? To try to get you to agree with me? To try to get you to subscribe to the same idea, philosophy, approach that I'm taking right now? In other words, am I trying to short circuit, go around my own work, avoid my task of individuation by trying to get you to change what you think and feel and perceive? We start to be aware of how much we do that. We start to be aware of how much people are doing that to us. But in that latter case, we don't spend a lot of time focusing on what other people are doing because that's their thing. There are people all over the world. You can find them anywhere. I can walk outside and bump into somebody who doesn't believe anything I'm talking about tonight, and who believes that their experience of emotion in the context of our relationship is mine to take care of. Now, all relationships require sacrifice and compromise. All relationships require sacrifice and compromise. That, in essence, is the definition of a relationship. But you get to decide the line when it's too far. The reason that I mentioned earlier that my relationships are so much more limited is because so few people are operating in this way. And I don't have the time or the energy to try to proselyte to the entire world and convince them of what I'm saying. So I would rather be, in this case, by myself. The company I find so much more enjoyable. But I also have relationships. I have a wife. I have 4 children. I have a daughter-in-law. I have a son-in-law. I have extended family. I have work friends. I have some friends, right? So to be in a relationship with them means to maintain a connection, a tether to myself, and then to find out where I can give up some part of that to maintain the relationship. Because if it's all about me all the time, then I'm not really in relationship. So it's a give and take. But I get to decide what's okay for me, and you get to decide what's okay for you. From The Audacity to Be You, I wrote, when we grow up in a home where the project is to be good and right, we are prone to lose a sense of ourselves. Being right and being a self are two diametrically opposing projects. Being right and being a self, being a human, being a person, are two diametrically opposing projects. If we grow up in a home where our feelings are heard, considered, and valued, we develop a clearer sense of who we are. That is what attachment theory shows us. It shows us that if feelings matter, if people are considered, even with boundaries, even with rules and structure and accountability, but if the emotional climate is safe, then the child grows up with a sense of who they are. So that when a peer tries to peer pressure them, when a partner tries to gaslight them, when somebody in the world tells them that how they're being is inconsiderate, they know themselves well enough to know, to some degree, that's good feedback, or I'm not interested in playing that game anymore. The first person to peer pressure a child is almost always the parent. We tell our children that our feelings are their responsibility, and then we are shocked when they grow up and don't have a sense of themselves. Isn't that crazy? That was how I raised my children early on, and sometimes still fall back into the pattern today. I thought, as a person being educated in this work, that I would simply tell my children how I felt when I was scared or happy, proud or disappointed, and that those statements of my feelings would be their indication of whether or not they were doing something right or wrong. I believed that. Most people I know believe that. Most people have any kind of education in mental health start off believing that you just simply tell people how you feel. I remember I was sitting with a young man one time, and he was describing all the ways in which his parents hurt him and how he was angry. It was very articulate, very sensitive, very clear. And I was training a therapist, and the therapist said to him, "Well, have you told your parents this?" And he said, "No, not exactly." But I jumped in and I said, "Well, it might not go well. In fact, you probably could plan on it not going well. Based on what I know about them and based on the relationship and everything I know, chances are they're going to be defensive because they're still trying to be good." That's the wound that the child carries, is the parents need to be good. So I said, "You can tell them and I will support you. But I don't necessarily expect that it's going to go well, not initially." It's still a worthy fight to have. That's what I mean by fight with each other in a healthy way. It's still a worthy battle to have. But the first response that you can expect from your loved ones is often change back. Don't change this way. This is unacceptable. Even in acute cases where I've worked with children who have severely distressing mental health issues, addictions, self-harm, suicidality, eating disorders, when I tell them to start talking to the parents about the anger and hurt that they felt being in that family, which is the cure, that's the cure. Most parents, the ones who made the great, painful, difficult sacrifice to send their child to meet with me to get fixed, quote unquote, almost a great percentage of the parents will become defensive. We'll try to talk to the child, try to explain to me that's not how it was. Those aren't the right details. The story is different. They're exaggerating. I didn't say that. So even in cases where parents are sending critically mentally ill children into treatment, when I tried to, and this began 29 years ago, and then I tried to get the children to talk about the hurt and the anger that they feel. And by the way, I don't care if they get it right at first. Who gets it right at first? If you've had a whole life where feelings aren't listened to and valued, you're not going to get it right at first. You're going to be messy. You're going to get it wrong. You're going to exaggerate. You're going to tell the story to prove the validity of your own feelings, right? You'll exaggerate, leave things out. That's to be expected. But if I'm to get into the heart and soul of the person that's suffering with this mental illness or addiction, I'm willing to go through that door. I'm willing to walk through that door. And that includes my children and my wife. So the second point is that there's no right answer. Don't make your boundary about being right. This is the way that it is. This is what healthy people do. This is the right thing to do. This is the responsible thing to do. Don't make it about being right, but rather about being a self. And here's the example. Here are the words that I would give you as an example. Remember, they're just an example of the energy. It sounds like this. I may be crazy. Maybe I'm old-fashioned. Maybe I'm an idiot. But this is my boundary. You see, this is the most powerful position that we can take. And taking the position that I am enough, that no is a complete sentence, that's the most important model that you'll ever teach to your children. I had a father who was very worried about his daughter coming home from our program years ago. He was very worried about the influence and impact of her peers, even though she'd done very well. Specifically a boyfriend. And the father wanted to prevent her, talk her out of re-engaging with the boyfriend. And he was very, very invested in this idea. And I said to him, be careful, you see. Because if you believe it's your job to control her, which is the very thing that you're afraid of that her boyfriend will do to her, you have solved nothing. So if she has to push back on somebody, let it be you first. Right? I want my children to rebel. I want them to differentiate. I want them to individuate. I want them to live their own life. And if I don't allow for a significant amount of rebellion, a pushback of boundaries, because of course I know what's best for them, and I'm here to shape them up into the perfect little people that I think they should be. If I'm living in that consciousness, then I'm the problem. I'm the one causing the very thing that I would complain about later when it's with somebody else. I say this in therapy once in a while when it applies. I say, it sounds like your partner or your parent or your child, whatever, whoever it is. I said, it sounds like they're okay with you. They want you to set a boundary with everybody but them. So how are you with boundaries? If you grew up in an enmeshed, anxious family, then boundaries will feel like an assault. You might have heard the term rejection sensitivity. In families where everybody has to believe and feel the same way and get along, boundaries are abandonment. Boundaries are toxic. Boundaries are an assault on the mental health the person experiences. It's not true. It's not those things. But that's how it's experienced in one's body if you grew up in an enmeshed, anxious family. Similar to the previous point that I was making, don't explain your decisions or your boundaries to others in an effort to get them to agree or be okay with the boundary. I'm going to read that again to you. Don't explain your decisions or boundaries to others in an effort to get them to agree or be okay with the boundary. Here's the language. Don't say things like, I'm doing this for your own good, or because I love you, or even because I'm trying to grow in my boundaries. If the effort is to try to get them to agree with you, to sign off on your boundary, you're still in the problem. And that's okay. But for the purpose of education, I want to be clear. If you're trying to say something to somebody to get them to agree, sign off, be okay with your boundary, you're still in the problem. If you're explaining to them because they want to understand, that's a different story altogether. I like the idea that boundaries are not walls, they are doors. Language matters. What the words that we say mean something. But if you're waiting for the perfect words to set your boundary, it may be a sign that you're seeking for words that will land just the right way. So you have to speak your truth in as few words as possible. Set your boundary, say them scared and shaking. You can even lead with something like, I'm afraid to say this, but I'm saying it because I want to stay in relationship with you. It would be easier for me to just avoid or push things down, but I want to stay in relationship to myself also. So I am telling you this in an effort to stay connected to myself and to find, if we can, a deeper connection between the two of us. Because that is really what boundaries are about. Boundaries are instructions to the people that you love how to stay in relationship with you. And as somebody who leans toward avoidant behavior like myself, it'd be easier for me not to say anything. It'd be easier for me just to ghost you, just to walk away. It'd be easier for me, and I have a history of doing this, just to stuff my feelings down, to disconnect from myself. But what I've learned about myself is eventually the bill will come due. Eventually, if I simply disconnect from myself, the payment will come due one way or the other, usually in a more ugly, it could be thought to be unhealthy way. So I'm telling you this because I want to stay in a relationship and I'm very scared. And because most people still think the goal in life is to be good, they'll hear your boundary as a criticism. But it's not. So you can at least embody that idea, even if you don't say it. Ultimately, you'll have to face your horrible, rotten self. From Harriet Lerner's book, The Dance of Anger, she said, no matter how long, one of her cases that she cites, the client said, no matter how long I'm in therapy, listen to this, no matter how long I'm in therapy, I'm still going to feel guilty if I say no to my father. But if I keep saying yes, I'm going to feel angry. So if I'm going to change, I guess I'll just have to learn to live with some guilt for a while. Do you see how that goes contrary to most things that we're taught? Most of us are taught that guilt has something to do with conscience and morality, that it's a signal that from part of us that what we're doing is wrong. And that's just not true. Period. Guilt is something to be curious about, but more often than not, people do the wrong things in the service of their guilt and their shame, not the right things. They disconnect from themselves. They don't take care of themselves. They abandon themselves. And then they act out in some pathological way that everybody can point to and say, see, you're the sick one. This same friend that I was talking about asked me the question. He said about the Mormon example that I gave to you. He said, I used to think of people leaving the church because they were sinning. But today, I hear that people say that they're leaving the church because for them, they want to climb to the next rung on the moral ladder, so to speak. That they're leaving for some virtue, not some vice. And I said to my friend, my colleague, I said, that's not really how I think about it. You see, the first group, I don't really think about them leaving because of a vice. I think about them leaving because they were disconnected. They had betrayed themselves long ago. And this vice that you're describing, that could become a problem in their life, is their authentic self gasping for breath, starving for food. And the expression of it can look symptomatic and pathological, but I honor it still as the voice of the authentic self. And if I can tune into that, eventually they can learn to walk out the front door in relationships instead of sneaking out the back door. But as a psychotherapist, I don't really distinguish between the person that becomes symptomatic. I had a client once who told me the story that when he drank and he would go through binge drinking, he would do all kinds of deplorable things. Infidelities, lying, cheating, spending money recklessly, a whole host of things. And yet, when he was sober, and he was sober in my presence during our sessions, he was the nicest, kindest, most anxious to please person I'd ever met. So I told him, I said, you're going to have to learn to be rude and obnoxious while you're sober. And what I meant by that is you're going to have to learn to set boundaries and accept the fact that people are going to accuse you of being rude and obnoxious. You're going to have to face the part of you you've been avoiding. There was never something to avoid in the first place. And if you can do that and establish that pattern over time, the next time you drink, you won't drink, not literally the next time, but the growth of that will lead to you not needing to drink to excess to free this starving child inside of you. So we learn to feel guilt as we get healthier. We learn to listen to our anger and our resentment. You know, there's this mistaken idea that drunk people tell the truth, that people when they're drunk tell the truth. That's not true. They tell a version of the truth. It's usually harsher, with sharper edges. They are said to be uninhibited. They have anesthetized the part of themselves that is anxious and worried and fearful. And so what comes out is raw and sharp and often has painful, pointy edges to it. But really what we're saying is, if you don't listen to that anger, it's going to come out in uglier ways. Freud is said to have suggested, and it gets quoted this way, this is not necessarily his exact quote, but he said, unexpressed feelings don't go away. When our feelings are buried alive, they just come out in uglier ways. So we learn to listen to our anger as a signal about poor self-care. When I find myself resentful about somebody and find all kinds of ways to criticize them in the way that they're being, I now listen to that signal as, can I take better care of myself? Is there a task of mine that is going unaddressed? A boundary that I need to set? Anger, resentment are signals often of poor self-care, and yet we want to make them about the other person. Harriet Lerner went on to explain in her book, The Dance of Anger, my favorite book on boundaries, anger is a tool for change when it challenges us to become less of an expert on others and more of an expert on the self. So how crazy your wife or your husband or your spouse is, how crazy and stupid and immature your children are, how toxic and unevolved your parents are, it doesn't matter. All of those things can be true. But the work is, how do you respond? How do you relate to them? So anger becomes an effective tool when it causes us to be more clear about ourselves and less of an expert on other people. Somebody writes in a question. I don't usually do this during the topics, but somebody says, here's where I'm getting tripped up. I'm comfortable communicating and holding my boundaries with my daughter until the outcome of violating my boundary, that boundary, is her being homeless. It keeps stopping me in my tracks. How can I reconcile that? I mean, that's a more like a more gentle version. Ultimately, you get to decide. I was talking to my youngest daughter recently about it. We were just talking about psychology, and I was giving examples where sometimes parents go no contact with children. And she looked at me incredulous and said, you tell them not to do that, right? What parent would go no contact with a child? That's crazy, Dad, she said to me. I said, well, I know it seems crazy, because hopefully it does seem crazy to you in this family, but if the child is physically assaulted, constantly stealing, emotionally abusive, right? There gets to be a line where the threshold is crossed. So I don't know what to tell you to do. You get to decide that. But where you're getting tripped up is where a lot of parents get tripped up. You can't control how they're going to respond. I will tell you that in some cases, it doesn't go the route that the threat suggests that it will. But that's exactly why I can't tell you what to do, because you have to live with the consequences. And if you abdicate your chief responsibility, which is the responsibility to live your life to me or to any expert, and say, where's the right boundary? Then eventually you'll end up resentful and blaming me or that other expert for the unwanted consequences. So you're in an absolutely impossible situation. And I'll kind of go back to one of my adages, which is, you don't get to win, you get to choose how to lose. And I support you, the person who asked this question, I support you either way. Do you see? I support you either way. Because I've seen people set boundaries with their kids, and I've seen kids die, literally. I've seen parents set boundaries with their kids, and it was the final thing that woke them up and got them back on track. I've seen parents not set boundaries with kids and give them chance after chance after chance. And it seems to be the greatest contribution to the child's mental illness and pathology. And I've seen parents not set boundaries with the children and have the children experience that as grace. And that's the inspiration that causes them to really address their mental illness. So you see, when we look at deciding our boundaries purely based on outcomes, we're just learning how to be manipulative. So it's a hard, impossible question that you're asking, but you get to ask it. And if you were my client, we would sit together and I would support you. Harriet Lerner says in The Dance of Anger, when we use anger to make statements about the self, we assume a position of strength because no one can argue with our own thoughts and feelings. They may try, but in response, we need not provide logical arguments in our defense. Instead, we can simply say, well, it may seem crazy or irrational to you, but this is the way that I see it. And finally, at the end of the day, parenting is impossible. Nobody knows your path. I don't know it, and no other therapist knows it. And the good ones know that they don't know it. The bad ones think that they know it. But luckily, our children don't need us to be flawless or perfect. If they do, they're doomed. What they need most from us is for us to live our authentic life. And so I said this in the Audacity to Be You. Lastly, after all of these ideas, these principles, these concepts to live by and live with, lastly, after all that, we can say we are sorry when we fail. Every parent has limits, and every child will discover the end of those limits. We can say sorry when we fall short of the ideal, and with this, the child learns perhaps the most important lesson of all, what it means to be human. Because that's all you can do. That's all you are. That's all you can be. Everything else is a lie. Being right, being good, a good mom, a good dad, a good parent, that's all the defense against living life. Subscribing to a dogma or a religion so that if you follow all the rules, you are deemed good by somebody's idea of a higher power. Those are what the analysts in Nietzsche suggested. That's the defense against God itself. There's no way around this work. We either become ourselves or we deny and disconnect from ourselves, and our symptoms will tell the story that we are unable to tell and deal with. All right, folks, if you don't know right by now, we have launched the Finding You Inner Circle, which means you get invites to all these live episodes. You can participate, ask questions, sit in on them live. You can also have access to a couple of hours a month that everybody else doesn't get. It's $100 a year. You can cancel that at any time. Or it's $10 a month. You can cancel that at any time. So the Finding You Inner Circle is a subscription in support of the Finding You podcast, and it offers you live broadcasts. If you're an alumni of the Finding You program specifically, since we opened in the fall of 2024, you're automatically enrolled. Any questions or you want to sign up, go to our website or email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. My 3 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, The Audacity to Be You, and my recently released book that I co-authored with Michael and Jeff McLean is called Stay in the Room. It's really me doing commentary on the kind of work that I describe. They tell their story, which is very engaging. They're amazing storytellers. Michael's a famous Mormon writer, director, musician, and Jeff is an incredibly gifted storyteller in the same image of his father. They're great at telling their stories. And so I just simply talk about the work that they did, what tasks they accomplished. Again, if you want to attend a workshop with Emma and myself, July 12th through 17th at the Omega Institute in New York, the Hudson Valley, eomega.org is the website, or in Boone, North Carolina, the Art of Living Retreat Center, artoflivingretreatcenter.org, September 27th through October 2nd, same workshop. If you want to attend Finding You Intensive, which I highly recommend, June 10th, we have 1 spot left. I'm going to be running that one. That will be one of 2 that I will run this year. June 26th through 28th is an online offering. We haven't offered that in a while. They're wonderful. We did them during the pandemic. And after the first one, I was very impressed with what we could accomplish. October 5th is the one after that. For all other inquiries for private intensives for couples and families, if you're looking for a coach or a therapist, or you want to sign up to be in our next support group, which is on the third Wednesday of each month for our alumni, and that's on June 20th, go to our website portal and reach out to us or email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. I will be back next week, and I'm so excited to talk about the interplay between faith and therapy. I'm very excited for that. That'll be Tuesday, June 9th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. So thanks for joining me. I hope this is a helpful point of contact in your week. And as always, for and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that you love, thank you for showing up and doing your work, because you doing your work makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.